Everyone sitting comfortably? I'll begin. A very good evening to you all, and thank you for turning out on this lovely autumn evening. And thank you to Steve Mason for inviting me to chair this event. I am Kevin Story, and for those of you lucky enough not to know me, I live at Setrington, where I run the estate. I am also chairman of Helpable Therapeutics, which is a company tackling the antimicrobial resistance crisis by trying to reinvigorate antibiotics. Finally, I am president of the Thurston Malton Conservative Association, but to be clear, where the organisers may not have been, I am chairing this discussion as a concerned individual, not as president of the association. My role, it seems to me, is to check the time taken by each of our distinguished speakers and then oversee questions afterwards. But before we get going, I would just like to mention that we have been graced with the presence of Natascha Engel, the government's newly appointed Commissioner for Shale Gas. Natascha, and you need to listen to this quite carefully, Natascha was the Labour MP for North East Derbyshire, where she stood on a pro-fracking ticket at the last general election, despite her party's national policy. She was defeated by Lee Rowley, now MP for North East Derbyshire, who won the seat on an anti-fracking ticket, despite his party's national policy. He is the first Conservative to win the seat there since 1935. Natascha and I met at the Conservative Party conference in Birmingham last Monday, where our roles were reversed. She was sitting on the UCOG, which is UK Onshore Oil and Gas panel, speaking and answering questions. And I was in the audience asking them. And I was doing so about residual liability for any well left on any landowner's land. And I heard of her appointment from Tim Breitner, President of the Country, Land and Business Association, which, incidentally, concurs with my concerns about that residual liability last Friday evening. Natascha has kindly agreed to answer any questions we may have of her at the end. Meanwhile, I am delighted to introduce our first speaker, Andy Tickle, and his subject matter is what do we mean by PD, permitted development, and NSIP, nationally significant infrastructure project, and all these acronyms I'm sure are all already very familiar to you, about what the CPRE, which is of course the Campaign to Protect Rural England's concerns about their threatened deployment. Over to you, Andy.
Obviously, I'm Andy Tickle. I'm head of campaigns at CPRE's office in Sheffield, covering South Yorkshire and parts of Derbyshire, including the Peak District. We're involved with fracking because we have 3 active shale gas exploration and planning cases, 2 already allowed on appeal, and 1 recently refused by Rotherham Council against planning officer recommendation to approve. Our main role, and I'm speaking locally, in the last 2 years has been to support locally affected communities and help them translate their rational and reasonable concerns into evidence that the planning system will take into account. We have also worked closely with regional Friends of the Earth staff and provided local training in how to take part in public inquiries. As an organisation, we also engage nationally with Parliament and Government, giving evidence at recent inquiries, including the ongoing work of the All-Party Parliamentary Group on shale gas. And this summer, and I guess why I've been invited, I've been coordinating CPRE's response to the permitted development and nationally significant infrastructure projects regime consultation consultations, and our CPRE response is now in its final draft, very close to being finished. That's been in consultation with all the branches across the CPRE network that have an interest in fracking. So what I want to do with you tonight is to share some of the top lines from that response. But just before I do that, I want to just say that, as some of you will know, the overall policy position of CPRE is we want to halt, it's called a moratorium, but it's a halt, to all fracking development, as the case for the so-called benefits, e.g. climate change mitigation, is in our view not proven. However, that was last week. The new IPCC report puts a new shade on matters. And I'll now quote from our national press release from Monday, just in respect to fracking. And this was Tom Fyans, our Director of Policy. And he said, the warnings today, i.e. from the IPCC report, also underline why fracking is a dead duck. We must speed up the transition to renewable energy. We have absolutely no time to mess around introducing a new carbon-emitting fossil fuel industry. So I hope that that puts our position on fracking beyond question. The organisers have asked me to talk about the government's recent proposals regarding PD, rights for shale gas exploration, and putting fracking into NSIP. As I said, these are our top lines. I'm very happy to take technical questions later if that helps. Are we okay so far? Great. Right. I'm now going to deal with PD, permitted development, and then NSIP. And I'll just make 3 points on each. As I said, I wanted to keep this fairly simple. Just to start with, most mineral exploration is rightly permitted development. Until now, oil and gas exploration, which is much lengthier in time, deeper and intensive, and riskier because of pressurised liquids and gas at greater depth, was excluded from permitted development, and for good reason. There is no way, in our view, in my view, that you can rationally argue that the development of the scale, duration, and impacts of shale gas exploration, I'm just talking about exploration, can be dealt with as PD. It is a nonsense. In fact, shale gas exploration would often fall to be considered as what is termed major development. To me, this says it all. How can major development be permitted development? It is a travesty of established good planning practice. End of. The second point is about equity with other forms of mineral development. So, the proposal is to lift what might be major development for minerals out of the usual regime and put it in permitted development. How will the non-mineral sector feel about that? I think that could be open to serious challenge. And what kind of message does it give them about the importance of their own minerals? My last point, very, very simple, is about the primacy of local democracy. The Prime Minister, Theresa May, described locally made planning decisions as, and I quote, the front line of democracy. She is right. Local mineral planning authorities, i.e. local councils, and here North Yorkshire, are best placed to make that decision. I'll now turn to NSIP, National Significant Infrastructure Projects. Again, 3 points. My first point is the same as my last point. Local mineral planning authorities should be deciding each application on a case-by-case basis because they vary. In NSIP, the the role of local communities is also significantly downgraded. For example, in the inquiry process, such as it is an examination process within NSIP, you can't indulge in cross-examination. You cannot have a forensic examination of what is right and what is wrong, and what the facts are either side. So, NSIP is not good for local communities. The second point about NSIP is that once a project enters the NSIP regime, the principle of the development and the need for it is not questioned. Okay? So, the principle of development is already approved, and that comes usually via the national policy statement, but there is no national policy statement for fracking. So, the overwhelming likelihood, once it's into NSIP, is that it will be approved, although the precise details, mitigation, conditions, etc. are up for grabs. Lastly, does fracking fit with the NSIP regime as it was originally designed and currently runs? The planning inspectors, if you go on their website, have a nice little sort of briefing sheet about NSIP, make it nice and simple. And so I take this quote from them, and it says, NSIPs are projects of certain types over a certain size which are considered by the government to be so big and important that permission to build them needs to be made as a national scale. So that's the quote. So, if we look at the aspect of the big, what are we talking about? Current thresholds include, for example, power or pipelines many kilometres long, maybe a rail interchange for 60 hectares or more, or for minerals, or the winning and working of minerals, sites between 100 and 150 hectares. Okay? So the size of a fracking well pad and associated land, about 3.5 hectares. It just doesn't compute. To end, I just want to make a few comments about this consultation, the government and civil society, including the environmental NGOs. On Monday, 20 major environmental groups, including CPRE, Friends of the Earth, Greenpeace, WWF, and the RSPB, and many others, described the PD and NSIP proposals as, quoting, quite simply unacceptable, and they must be dropped immediately. Those groups and the communities that we work with are not a travelling circus. Nor do we cut and paste responses to government consultations. We at CPRE are experts in the English planning system and campaign for a sustainable, thriving countryside. We want to believe that this is a serious consultation, where ministers will carefully consider our responses, which have evolved over months of work within the national CPRE network and also sharing ideas as well with others. We hope that the government will now recognise that to proceed with them would be, and again I'm quoting from the letter to the Daily Telegraph from those 20 groups, a ruthless subversion of local democracy. And so we ask them to do the right thing and to drop the proposals. Thank you.
Absolutely clear, we're going to take questions at the end. So the next speaker is Frank Colenso, and he's going to give the viewpoint of a local resident of Ryder.
Good evening. My name is Frank Colenso. I'm a father of 4 and a grandfather to 3. I'm a retired businessman, having spent 50% of my working life abroad. We live in Hovingham. I'm a community campaigner for climate change, and I'd like to share with you my rationale why we shouldn't accept permitted development and NSIP. I'm not going to talk to you about the myths or the need for energy security, but about the truths and the need for energy responsibility. The truth is that we have to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels to prevent further global warming. With the possibility, or with the exception of Donald Trump, it's safe to say that the majority of the world's population believe in man-made climate change and that we urgently need to do something about it. Globally last year, there were hurricanes Irma, Harvey and Katrina. One of these hurricanes, just one, Irma, cost an estimated $300 billion. The extreme weather conditions we've experienced here in the UK this summer, scorching temperatures, long spells of dry weather, torrential rain and flashing floods. We've also seen in the past weeks the wild tropical storm Florence in the US and the typhoon Mangkhut in China and the Philippines. This week, we've seen Hurricane Michael and the flash flooding in Mallorca. Thousands of people displaced with much loss of life. The economic impact has been catastrophic. The problem is that while governments are focused on reaching the Paris climate change targets, these targets are already out of date. I've got some feedback on the mic. Can you get any feedback? No, you're okay? Good. These targets are already out of date. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report released this week shows that the warming is now 3 degrees faster than previously understood, leading to the prediction that the world will be 1.5 degrees warmer in 12 years. So what does that mean to us? 32 million people in Europe will be impacted by water scarcity. The frequency of high flows in our major riverbeds and storms and flooding will increase by 85%. The population affected by flooding in Bangladesh will increase by 200% and in India by 300%. In just over 10 years from now, we are on a collision course with nature as we know it. The IPCC report states that the world is now completely off track. Keeping to our 1.5% target above pre-industrial levels will mean, and I quote, rapid, far-reaching, unprecedented changes in all aspects of society. It goes on to say, it's the final call. We need urgent and unprecedented action. The IPCC says we need to halve the emissions in the next 10 years. The planet is simply overheating because of the use of fossil fuels over the last 150 years, and we are at a turning point. Even if we partially accept the solid scientific evidence, then our actions on climate change still need to be faster, bolder, and more radical. Extracting more fossil fuels, new fossil fuels, is not the answer. The second truth is that we do not need more gas to produce plastics. We've seen on TV the devastation plastics are doing to our oceans. Next time you're out walking, take a close look in the hedgerows this autumn, when the grass has died away and the leaves on the trees have gone. The hedgerows in our countryside is full of it. INEOS have said that they want to extract the gas to use at Grangemouth to produce plastics. INEOS have 50% of the UK pedal licences. I want you to hold that thought for a moment. Another new report this week, the International Energy Agency predicts a sharp increase in greenhouse gas emissions from the petrochemical industry. And I quote, petrochemicals are currently the largest industrial energy consumer and the 3rd largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions. The main driver of the petrochemical industry, growing the climate footprint will be plastics. When is the penny going to drop? We've all been at some time responsible as plastic polluters. Polluters including INEOS should also be made to contribute to the plastic and the atmospheric cleanup. We all have to pay our way in life from birth to grave. Companies are no different, from products beginning to the end. Yes, we've all benefited from fossil fuels, but like any addiction, you have to recognize when the addiction is affecting our well-being. And here's the third truth, why we shouldn't allow permitted development and NSIP. We must not allow our democracy to be hijacked by the fossil fuel industry. The scaremongering. The scaremongering soundbites that come from industry and government that we need to frack for our energy security is nonsense, or some would say fake news. Yes, 40% of our energy comes from gas today and 2/3 are imported. If they were able to extract enough gas in the next 10 years, the most enthusiastic estimates suggest that fracking will only provide 1/3 of our gas needs going forward. Globally, there is an abundance of gas. Today we have two main suppliers, Qatar, with 70% of our gas coming from Norway. So unless we're planning to have a fallout with Norway sometime soon, I don't see we're going to have a problem. Secondly, and most importantly, it is not news. It is not news that the North Sea gas reserves have been declining. They've been declining for years. We've seen this trend coming for a long time. Yes, we use a lot of gas, so let's put a lot of effort into stop using so much. It's time to do a U-turn and accelerate the support and improve the energy efficiency of a large number of older housing stock we have in the UK. Yet in 2016, government stopped funding the Green Housing Deal Company. No more grants, just a website and advice. In order to move away from gas, this is a practical issue that needs to be addressed and cannot be left for another 10 years. And we need to start it now. So never mind energy security, we need energy responsibility. Why can't we build every new house at zero carbon neutral? Why can't every new house be fitted with solar panels so they become part of the energy source? Why can't we encourage more community energy initiatives? This is real homegrown energy security. This is energy responsibility. And just think of the jobs. In summary, I am also not part of Claire's travelling circuit of protesters. Or stuck in some ideological nirvana. Quoting our new commissioner, Natascha, and I was there at the meeting, you stated at the Conservative Party conference that there's only a small handful of people who are against fracking. You also said that there's a bigger social license for it than a small group of local campaigners. And that they are emotional rather than rational. I want to reassure you, Natascha and Claire Perry, that the local opposition to fracking is overwhelming. Campaigners that I meet are level-headed mothers, fathers, grandparents, teachers, doctors, scientists who have researched and thought through this subject. You only see what the press shows you in the headlines. For the most part, it's the stories that can be sensationalized. People like us don't make the headlines, but we we are by far the main characters in the story. We need the truth to come out. If we now extract new sources of fossil fuels, we'll simply defer the problem to the next generation, when they will already have enough on their hands. As my children tell me, we're all responsible as guardians for this beautiful planet. We all need to help clean it up, and fracking away at it will not do it. I'll leave you with one final thought. Are we really going to allow democracy to be hijacked by the fossil fuel industry and have all the decisions taken in London?
Just by way of clarification, which I'm sure you'll all know, Claire Perry is the Minister of State for Energy in the Department of BEIS, B-E-I-S, and I think that's Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, another acronym. Responsible to Greg Clark, who is the Minister or the Secretary of State to whom I wrote in March about residual liability, and he has yet to reply. I'm now going to introduce Nick Howard, who's going to give the viewpoint of a landowner and a major attraction owner of his eponymous castle.
Good evening, and thank you all for coming this evening. It's a very, very important subject, this. I thought I'd start off by talking about how I've ended up sitting on this platform. I am responsible for a large number of Grade 1 listed buildings built over 300 years ago. When I heard that there was going to be fracking going on beneath the land, the first thing that worried me was when I heard that fracking causes earthquakes, seismic activity. So of course I began to research it. And when I began to research, I found more and more to worry me. I think my initial reactions were both fear and anger. The fear was of a new industry being parachuted into rural England with no proper regulation, no proper insurance, no track record, no local support, which could pollute our waters, destroy our roads, ruin our businesses, and foul up the beauty of our countryside. And then they could leave with the landowner having all residual responsibilities. Of course, those who want to glorify fracking will tell you that the wells are perfectly safe, that there is no problem here, that the companies look after them, that they're responsible. But most of the companies that are involved in fracking are subsets of larger companies. And you can bet your bottom dollar that they will cease to trade once they've finished at those wells. And then the landowner is responsible in perpetuity. So that's where the anger starts to come in. All this stuff is being treated as stuff and nonsense by government. All the opposition. All local opposition is being sidelined and ignored, with decisions about to be entirely centralised. Permitted development. Sounds ridiculous. Now, this could be seen as paranoia from an ivory tower. And yet, after the Lancashire earthquakes, there was a traffic light system suggested, which would put a very, very low threshold on the amount of seismic activity that could occur before fracking was stopped until whatever the problem was sorted out. Now, it seemed a pretty lax way of dealing with it then, but at least it was something. And then, 2 or 3 days ago, I read that Claire Perry is suggesting that these regulations should be relaxed. Again, it makes no sense at all. Today, I received a comprehensive email from our insurance brokers, and it confirms everything that I've been worrying about. I'll just quote from it briefly, and insurance brokers, of course, are very careful with their words. Caution should be exercised in allowing fracking operations to take place until a government or industry backstop is in place, since as matters presently stand, there is no safety net for landowners. There are insurance solutions, but the annual cost and level of indemnity provided relative to the income received is likely to render cover unattractive. Translated, that means that there is no way that we can be covered for damage to the land, to the water, and the pollution that comes from it. Absolutely no way. The insurance and for those who own land, whether it's 3 acres or 30,000 acres, their guardianship is being put in question, because we are all guardians of the land in one way or another. As well as being, in my case, anyway, a privilege, it's also a responsibility owning land. It's a privilege and a responsibility for now and for the future. Now, I'm not going to go into the fiercely negative impact of climate change. Frank has covered that, and others have mentioned it as well. But it's important that we realise that it could be possible, by standing up to this grotesque insult to our local democracies and personal freedoms, it could be possible to have a real influence on combating climate change, which, as last week showed, we have to do. So I hope that everybody in this room can join in trying to oppose this appalling business.
So, replacing Lindsay Burr, who has been taken ill, is Paul Andrews, Mayor of Malton, talking about the issue from a councillor's perspective.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Malton, the heart of the Yorkshire sacrifice zone. Let me explain why I think this should be called a sacrifice zone. You see, you can't have fracking unless there is a grid of drill sites. It's not just one or two here and there. If you don't believe me, you have only to read paragraphs 5.134 and 5.137 of the North Yorkshire Minerals Plan. This accepts, as a matter of policy, grids of fracking drill pads, each 2 hectares in area, at a density of 10 to every 100 square kilometres. In imperial measure, that 100 square kilometres is approximately 38 square miles, and which is an area just 6 miles by 6 miles, which means drill pads, each 2 hectares in area, spaced apart every 1.5 to 2 miles in every direction. Now, I attended the public examination into the North Yorkshire Plan, and the issue of density came into question, and the developers were there. And what did they say? They said they would not even accept this density. They wanted the ability to put a lot more drill pads per 100 square kilometres, tighter together if they wished. You might think this is bad enough, but the proposals that are being consulted upon make the situation far worse. If you want to build a house or factory, you have to get planning permission. The proposal is, if you want to spend a couple of £1 million putting a drill bore down for gas, just for exploration, you can do it any way you like without getting planning permission. Is that fair? I don't think so. This, of course, only applies to exploration. If you then want to apply for planning permission to frack on a commercial basis, the government wants the application to be dealt with by a government quanko called NSIP, which has no local accountability, is accountable only to the government, is not required to consult locally or to hold local public inquiries, and, which has not been mentioned before, is able to confer powers of compulsory purchase. Now, the excuse for this is that planning authorities are far too slow in making decisions on planning applications. Shame on them. However, this is not what Minister said in July 2015, because in a letter dated July 2015 from several ministers to George Osborne, which has been leaked to the press, it says, as well as improving the current planning system, it is important that we have a long-term approach to planning which is suitable for handling the large number of applications that would be seen at a full production stage. We are therefore minded to bring commercial shale production within the nationally significant infrastructure planning regime. So this isn't new, this is several years ago, and to be ready to begin the move from early 2016, we're a bit late on that, aren't they? For, and this is the point I really want to emphasise, for large-scale applications. Large-scale applications. Keep that phrase in your mind. This paragraph that I've just read out to you shows very little concern about speeding up the planning process. It suggests that the real reason for reference to NSIP is to deal with large-scale applications. What is meant by large-scale applications, you may ask? Clearly, this cannot be applications for consents for individual drill pads. It is more likely to mean outline or full applications for the development of entire grids of fracking drill pads over vast tracts of land. The whole Vale of Pickering, for example, with 50 or more proposed drill pads, which is the density if you do 10 to every 100 square kilometres. The whole of that area could be comprised in a single large-scale planning application and dealt with as such by NSIP. Who benefits from this? Well, what it would do is it would give the investment industry the certainty that they may need to attract investment, to invest in fracking. And the purpose of this would be to enable fracking to be rolled out all over the country very, very quickly. Thousands of these sites within only a few years. This is outrageous. Most Rydale local councils oppose these proposals, and I believe most Rydale people do too. Rydale District Council opposes them, so do Malton and Northern Town Councils. So please add your own opposition. Now, whenever we have this subject, whenever you see fracking raised in the press, you find the government comes back with a little answer, which they repeat over and over again, on the basis that if you repeat something over and over again, people will believe it. They say there is a national need, a pressing national need for shale gas. Is there?
No.
In October 2017, the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy published a report with the title Gas Security of Supply. Looking ahead over the next 20 years, it says, on page 14, if you've got a copy, whilst the government is optimistic about the potential for shale gas in the UK, given the industry is currently in an exploratory stage, it is not yet known how much of the UK shale gas resource will ultimately be recoverable. In order to provide, and listen to this, listen to the next bit, in order to provide a conservative estimate of supply forecasts used assume no shale contributions in the forecast period. The document goes on to say that there will be security of gas supply without shale gas during the forecast period, and that is up until 2035. how can they say that there is a pressing, urgent need to develop shale gas? It's a lie. Some of you may know that I'm taking legal proceedings against the government in regard to the Minister's written statements. And I'll briefly go into that. There are some good things as well as bad things in the North Yorkshire Minerals Plan. The good things include a 500-metre buffer between fracking surface workings and drill pads, prohibitions against fracking in the National Park, and various other measures. The planning inspector who looked at this plan provisionally approved it. The UK petroleum and gas industry were outraged. They protested to government. And Greg Clark, within 5 weeks of the inspector's provisional decision, Greg Clark, the Secretary of State, produced a minister's written statement which, to anybody looking at it, was deliberately intended to undermine the inspector's provisional decision. So I have raised funds and continue to raise funds for legal proceedings which I have commenced. I would thank all of you who have contributed for the funds you have contributed. The purpose of the action is to get this minister's written statement set aside. The grounds for challenge which Councillor Mark Withers QC has chosen is the fact that the minister's written statement shows a change of direction which requires a strategic environmental assessment before the requirements of the minister's written statement can be implemented. This means that if the action is successful, the Secretary of State can't simply go back to his office and rewrite the minister's written statement in a way which doesn't offend the law and then push this through the relevant parliamentary procedures, which is exactly what they did with Article 50 after the Miller case. Instead, he will actually have to go through a lengthy legal procedure, including examination of expert opinion and public consultation, to prove that the purpose of his change of direction cannot be achieved by other means. This is the public debate on fracking that we all want, isn't it? And this is worth pursuing as hard as we possibly can. Legal proceedings are not cheap, so we've raised nearly £22,000 for a preliminary hearing which is due to take place on 5th November, Fireworks Day. After this, we will still need to raise more money for the final hearing. All fundraising is going through Crowd Justice and is paid direct to my solicitor, not to me. So I can only thank you if you have contributed already, and if you haven't contributed, all I can say is please give generously. Thank you very much.
A week or so ago, Kevin very kindly sent me a report on the Conservative Party conference to which I referred earlier, and in it contained a clip to a most amazing speech made by Geoffrey Cox, the new Attorney General. And if you haven't seen it, it's worth it. Even if you don't agree with the Conservative Party policy on pretty well anything, it's a brilliant speech, absolutely fantastically presented. So, I have to say that it is very brave of my good friend Kevin to come and address us tonight. But without stealing any of his thunder, I think you'll find he's sympathetic to at least some of our concerns. And so it's with great pleasure that I introduce the Member of Parliament for Thurston and Malton.
Well, good evening. It is fair to say that as far as most of the members here this evening, most of the people in this room this evening, are probably on a slightly different page in terms of, and most of the panel, a slightly different page in terms of the need for domestically produced gas. But hopefully you will be more pleased to know that we are pretty much on the same page in terms of my opposition to the prospective change in planning rules. I do fully understand, fully accepting, I've been a politician for 3 years now, that there's very little trust in politics anymore, and so I probably don't expect to trust everything I say, but one of the reasons, as a consequence of that, when the Labour government brought forward the Climate Change Act in 2008, it decided not to give politicians the responsibility to make sure the government stuck to its obligations to mitigate climate change. It gave it to a separate committee, an independent committee of academics and scientists called the Committee for Climate Change. And they came out with a report in 2016 that says, given certain conditions, 3 key conditions, shale gas exploration is consistent with meeting our obligations, our climate change obligations. Well, that's absolutely fact. Now, as was referred to, as Frank referred to earlier, clearly this situation is changing constantly. And the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, I read that report like probably everybody in this room did. And it may be that government policy will change on the recommendations of the Committee on Climate Change. And if that committee was ever to say that we shouldn't produce gas, that would then mean we didn't meet our obligations in terms of mitigating climate change, then I too would accept those recommendations and would oppose it. So that decision whether we should produce gas or not is left with a separate third party of scientists and academics that we should listen to. But the reality is, in the current forecasts, for the next few decades, we will definitely be needing gas. There are 23 million homes in the UK connected to the gas supply. There are many industries rely on gas. Of course, we should continue to invest in renewables and insulate our homes more effectively. Of course, we should do that. Well, I think we're the only developed country that has a policy completely phasing out its coal power stations by 2025. And that at a time when Germany, for example, is building many, many coal power stations to try and meet its energy needs. So this government does take this seriously. As a nation, we need to take this seriously. I absolutely accept that. But where we got onto the same page, one thing I've always said, and when we have these differences in terms of my policy versus what other people would like my policy to be, I've said I would only support shale gas on the basis we protect the environment and the landscape of North Yorkshire. As a consequence of that, what I did, as many of you know, went to Pennsylvania to look at shale gas exploration on the ground in 2015. And as a consequence of some of that learning there, we came back and I worked very closely with North Yorkshire County Council and the National Parks in bringing forward that Minerals and Waste Plan. And the restrictions in that plan about proliferation, the number of well pads, 10 well pads as a maximum per 100 square kilometres. And there are other restrictions too, clearly no development within national parks, within areas of outstanding natural beauty, within areas of triple SIs. All those restrictions apply. And the restrictions in terms of access, making sure any sites had good access from decent roads. And also buffer zones around national parks and AOMB and around homes. I think that is a good plan, and that plan was put before the inspector. As part of my job also, I sit on the Select Committee for Housing, Communities and Local Government. It was my instigation that I brought Clive Betts, the chair of that committee, to Kirby Musperton so he could see this on the ground. And what we agreed to do as part of our work, we took forward an inquiry, which some of you will read. I've got a copy of that, the report of that inquiry here, an inquiry on the planning guidance on fracking. This actual document references the North Yorkshire plan, and this should provide a guideline for others, which I absolutely believe it should. It was at that time, during that inquiry, that the government did bring forward its written ministerial statement on changing planning rules, bringing forward permitted development and national significant infrastructure project status. I think that's wrong. I don't think the government should do that. I've made that position very clear. With myself and Carl Les, who's the leader of North Yorkshire County Council, met with ministers yesterday, both the Planning Minister and the Energy Minister, to express our deep concerns. As some of you know, I took part in a debate recently at Westminster Hall, where again I expressed my concerns. If the government pushes ahead with permitted development and NSIP without the controls and guidelines, I will absolutely oppose it. And Patricia, a couple of points to conclude. In terms of remediation, both Kenham and Nick brought this up. I absolutely agree with that. I have written to the Prime Minister a number of occasions and the Secretary of State to say it absolutely has got to be that the government is the backstop at this point, at some point. Of course the industry should pay. The industry should set up a fund, and this is what it's agreed to do, a fund where every well pad, every time a well is drilled, somebody goes into a fund, so the remediation fund, so that any potential cost does not fall on the taxpayer, but it would be extremely unfair if it fell on the landowner. I absolutely think we need to deal with residual liability. And I also think we need to make sure that local people do get some benefit in terms of financial benefit, direct financial benefit. And on that note, I will conclude. Thank you very much, Mr.
Well, as I said, that was very brave of Kevin to come into the Lion's Den. I'm not going to say because that would be unfair on this, I don't know. Over to you.
Thank you. So my name is Nick Howard. I'm a professor of physics with an interest in research in climate change. I would like to ask Nick Howard, actually, so your family have been custodians of Castle Howard for about 319 years, I believe.
Roughly.
So I would just like to ask how you feel about the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's conclusion that we have about a decade in which, before we get to about 1.5 degrees temperature rise above the pre-industrial baseline, and that beyond that point it's very hard to be certain, but there seems to be a pretty high risk that we will lose control of the climate system. How does that make you feel when you've basically been in charge of a very stable situation for the last 320 years?
Just to be absolutely clear, Nick, I do know you, and Nick is a professor. Could you, Steve, would you just bring the microphone back so Nick can explain exactly who he is and his credentials, because that might be interesting for everyone to know.
Okay, so I was, until about 6 years ago, professor of nanoscience and nanotechnology at Newcastle University. Since then I've taken early retirement and I've taken an interest in climate change, which has been a long-term interest of mine. And I've been researching the probable temperature rise which the globe is going to undergo over the next few years. My conclusion was that we will probably reach 1.5 degrees in about 2028, plus or minus about 5 years. And it seems that the IPCC has come up with about 2030. So we seem to be very much in agreement. So my concern is that it's also the view among the experts that we risk the possibility that after that point we will lose control of the climate system, which means that everything we've always hoped for is up for grabs and could be lost.
Okay, I promise you this isn't going to take as long every time. And I'm not just trying to buy time for Nick to answer the question. But you should also know that Nick joined Frank and me with Kevin in a meeting with Claire Perry, the Minister of State for Energy, as I've already mentioned, back in April. So now over to Nick.
Just one word comes across in this. I was terrified when I read that report and read about it. Almost as terrified as I was when I read yours, actually. And it was, the only relief that I felt was that their conclusions were so close to your own, and that there is good work going on to try and find out what we are doing to ourselves. The next good work that has to go on is that we do something about it.
Would you like anyone else to have a go at the question, or are you happy with that?
Yes, I would like to hear what Mr. Heinrich feels about belonging to a Conservative Party which virtually wants to deny all this stuff.
Nick, I don't think that's right at all. I invited you down to Parliament to meet the Energy Minister so that they could hear your views. I'm someone that does believe we should listen to experts. And as I said before, you'll be aware of some of the academics and scientists that are on the Committee on Climate Change. I presume you have confidence in those people. I have confidence in those people. We have got to listen to the experts. We all fear climate change, there's no doubt about that, and we're investing more money in trying to mitigate the effects of climate change. But we've got to, can I just make the point?
How is it then possible? How is it then possible to how is it then possible to think that it is worthwhile to invest in a fracking industry that won't come into action until after 2030 in a serious way, when 2030 is the time when we're about to lose control of the climate system?
Well, climate change come out and say that, Nick, I will accept those recommendations.
They are years behind the curve. The IPCC are the people who know what they're talking about. The Committee on Climate Change will have to spend a year at least trying to catch up the latest news and then tell you what to do. When you can just look at what the IPCC has said and realise you've got to do a huge about face about this.
I mean, one thing I think we probably do agree on, we've got to tackle climate change internationally. We can't do it nationally. We've got to take a strategic approach, and we've given the responsibility of advising government, holding government to account to a separate body of scientists and academics. I think we should listen to them. And if their recommendation is that we should not frack, and so be it. You'll know that the three conditions of shale gas exploration, two of those conditions were carbon capture and storage, which the government's just invested £100 million in, and well, it has, and the fact that shale gas, if produced, must displace imports. It must displace. It's not an additional industry, an additional source of fossil fuels. It's a replacement for gas we would otherwise import. That's one of the conditions of the Committee on Climate Change's recommendations.
All right, just jump ahead.
Hello? Is this switched on? Yep. Okay. My name is David Craig-James. I'm a concerned local resident, and my question is for Mr. Hollingray. I'd like to congratulate Mr. Hollingray on...
Hold it closer to your mouth.
Too close to my mouth?
Closer. Closer.
Okay. My guess is that all of us, including those who vehemently oppose your stance on fracking, welcome your restated commitment to local democracy. However, my question is as follows, and it's twofold. If we are successful in resisting both PD for exploration and NSIP for fracking, how can you prevent a local negative decision on a fracking application, or one which overruns the 16 weeks ludicrously allowed for local determination being simply called in by government? Secondly, are you prepared to fight to give back teeth to local democracy? Will you resist the recent emasculation of planning authorities? Will they be able once again to use the climate change argument in objecting to an exploration or fracking application? Will they be able to talk about fracking using the common sense definition and not that in the Infrastructure Act? Will they be able again to consider such things as air and water contamination without being obliged to assume that the so-called regulatory authorities have the resources and the competence to apply and enforce any regulation? Otherwise, Mr. Honorary, it seems that you're being less than open with us. It seems you're seeking electoral advantage in loudly supporting democracy, while it's confident all around that authority will prevail.
I think most people in here would agree. If I wanted electoral advantage, I wouldn't be in favour of shale gas exploration. There's no doubt. There is no doubt. There is no doubt that this is. Many people are concerned about this, and the people who are in favour, they're not going to vote for me because I'm in favour of shale gas exploration. So I have not done anything since I've become a Member of Parliament on the basis of electoral advantage. In terms of local democracy, local planners do not set national planning policy. Whatever planning policy you look at, whether it be for housing, whether it be for a commercial premises, whether it be for a shale gas exploration site, national planning policy is passed by government and then passed down to the local authority to determine the application. So the local authority determines the application, whether it's for a house or whether it's for a shale gas exploration site. If that is rejected, the applicant can appeal. That's the policy for every single planning application in the UK. And you appeal to the government's inspector. The government's inspector then decides whether the local authority has determined that application correctly in accordance with national policy. So in short answer, David, no, I cannot stop, nor would I attempt to stop a local decision being appealed to an inspector.
Very good. Gentlemen in the dark toilet front, please.
Derek Chapman, a local councillor.
Sorry, what was your name?
Derek Chapman, I'm a Kevin local councillor.
Thank you.
I'm against fracking, but what's concerned me more in the journey is the mechanism to impose fracking. So I'd like to say to Natascha and to Kevin, I don't believe the consultation is fit for purpose. I don't want to tick box consultation exercise. I want to be consulted, and more than that, I want to be heard, and CPRE and all their members would like to be heard, and go further and not be insulted. So the point of that is, do you believe the consultation is fit for purpose? It's a rhetorical question because the answer is absolutely not. I'm going to tell you why. All the residents here say no, you're not representing them. The BEIS survey for 7 years has showed a 2-to-1 opposition to fracking, yet you sit here and you've been at the conference and you've not supported that opinion. That's the government's own opinion, which shows that shale has always been opposed, yet you haven't read the report. County councils, town councils, district councils, all of them have put moratoriums through the vote. Have you heard them? Have you consulted them? Or are you just here to ignore them? Are you here to just sell us something we don't want? Because that really troubles me, that your role is basically to tell us we're wrong. You're not here to hear us. And that really is the sharp end of a consultation that has got worse and worse for 5-6 years. And the end point is, there is no consultation. If you take it out of local democracy, it won't be effective. Many people won't access it. Many people won't be heard. So thank you for indulging me. The second part of this point, sorry Steve, is that you're not even listening to your own experts. Okay. The question is, should Peter Stiles, the advisor to Ineos and Cameron, be heard as a consultant? should he be heard? Because we've mentioned the traffic light system, it's been through the newspaper this week. We've mentioned how important it is. But Peter Stiles put 3 proposals forwards, and the third was the traffic light system. The first was that surveys would be included in the planning process. You have ignored that for 5 years until he came back with support to the APPG. Will we get surveys in planning? Peter Stiles wants it. He's an expert consultant. Second point is Peter Stiles also wants setbacks from identified faults. I'm not hearing these words from the government. I'm hearing from an expert consultant. I'm hearing traffic light system. So the point is if you're going to consult, will you please listen to the experts?
Can we let Natascha answer those questions?
Okay.
Otherwise we could be here all day, all night.
I mean, just on the Peter Stiles issue, Steve wrote to me about Peter Stiles. I wrote to the minister. That's as a consequence of that. I think so that the Guardian, I think you were shared with the Guardian or Greenpeace, Steve, and it picked up the fact that the traffic light system might be adjusted, the level might be raised at some point in the future. I think that's absolutely the wrong thing to say at this point in time. I think we absolutely need to make sure this exploration, if it is done safely. And so I think raising the potential of a relaxation of those regulations at the moment is the wrong thing to say. And I absolutely understand the point about, I think it was about proximity to historic mines. I think that was a principal issue. The letter, the response, I'm answering now there, the letter is, I think, on my website, or if not, it will be. You can all read that and see what the response, what the letter was to Peter Stiles, Kemp and Steve, and the response. I think in terms of a tick box exercise, our select committee wrote to the minister, and again, that letter, I've only just seen it today, because we had concerns. Is this really a consultation, or has the government made up its mind in terms of permitted development and NSIP? That was part of the conversation we had yesterday with ministers. I absolutely think the government, bearing in mind the strength of feeling, and some of you might have watched the debate in Westminster Hall, in terms of the potential changes to this, to the planning, how the planning worked for shale gas. I think the government understands that there is a lot of feeling here. I don't think it's going to press ahead regardless. I think it's going to listen very carefully. One thing I've always said is that you may not like my position on fracking, and I think most of you don't, but the reality is, at some point in time, because the government has had my support in terms of shale gas exploration, if at any point in the time in the future I oppose the government, that will carry a lot more weight, and I've told the ministers that if they push ahead with these plans at the moment, I will definitely oppose it.
Can I suggest to everybody that we try and limit our questions to a sort of precise question so that we can make it clear. Natascha, do you want to have a go at that?
Yeah. The question was, will you hear us in consultation?
Yeah, and actually I've come up from London this afternoon in order to be here, so I think I'm definitely here to hear you, and I'm definitely not here to ignore you, and it's very nice to be in Rydell, and thank you very much for inviting me. I've been in post now for 10 days, so it's really at the beginning. I don't even have an email address yet, so I'm literally just sort of finding my feet on this. But from your question, it sort of implied that you thought I was working for the government. I'm a government appointment, but I'm completely independent of government. What I'm not is impartial. I'm not impartial. I do support the exploration of shale gas as a way of helping us to reach our climate change targets. And I think that is something where I think there's a legitimate difference of opinion. You are of one opinion, I'm of another. We were sort of here to talk about permitted development, but actually I think that the issue about the role of gas in the energy mix is really, really important. And just to say that we should stop using all fossil fuels overnight is not realistic. And absolutely. I'm just saying there's a legitimate debate to be had about the role of gas and where we get it from. Now, you are of one opinion. You are of one opinion.
Not my opinion. Where is public opinion right now, according to your survey? Please.
I have not done any surveying on public opinion.
Okay.
I know that in this room, public opinion is very, very strongly against fracking. I can absolutely see that. But the reason why we are here is to talk about permitted development. Now, your original question was about whether or not this was a genuine consultation. It's a consultation, and it closes on the 25th of October. It's also a primary consultation. It's just headline questions. There's another detailed consultation following it if they decide to go ahead with this. But of course it's a consultation, of course it's open. And of course government will listen. If there's an overwhelming case against, then government will have to listen to that. Absolutely.
Please, if we can just be quiet as we can to give the questioners the chance to ask the question, the respondents the respect to answer the question, okay? If we're not going to get anywhere just shouting at each other. Lady in front.
Okay, another one here. Right, my name's Jo White, and the first thing I would like to say to Claire Perry is that I'm a chartered surveyor, I'm a professional person, I am not part of a travelling circus, I am not and a resident. We are so angry. I hope you take that message back. And what I would like to say is this government really listening? Because we have now had how many surveys on fracking? About 5.
25.
And every result has been opposed and the government has pressed on regardless. So you can understand how people here are sceptical. But what I would also like to say, is the government really listening? Because in September of this, I think it was this summer, Lord Deben of the climate change.
John Gunner.
Yes. He basically said there is no room for fracking because of the. Yes, he did, Kevin. It's quoted. Yes, he did. And you might shake your head, but
please send me that. It'd be very interesting.
I will happily send you it. And I don't think the government is listening. I don't think they are listening. And are people aware in this room that the Committee on Climate Change actually has no teeth? The government is obliged under the law to consult and have regard to what they say, but they can ignore them. They can ignore them. And the bottom line of this is they are not fully listened to, because the other issue is Claire Perry, as our climate change minister, wants to carry credits forward from budgets which they are on track to fail. So how will you
Kevin or Natascha want to speak on behalf of the government, but
well, I'm listening, and I'm here and listening, and when the ministers, they listen to me, and I can't make a decision on this. I'm not the energy minister or the prime minister, clearly, but all I can say to you is that when that report came out, that eagerly anticipated report from the Committee on Climate Change, when it came out, had it said that shale was inconsistent with our obligation on climate change, I would have opposed it. And I would do so in the future if that was the case. And whether the government decides to follow that advice or not is up to the government. I think it would be foolhardy politically if the government didn't have regard and follow the recommendations of the Committee on Climate Change. This country has a world-leading record in terms of reducing its carbon emissions, much better than Germany. If you're unsure of that, okay. If you're unsure of that, there's something called the Climate Change Performance Index. Please Google it. It's written by an organisation in Germany. We are number 3 in that list. We're ahead of Germany. We're ahead of Sweden. We're ahead of all the countries you can name. I think apart from France and I think sorry, it might be France and Sweden, but all the other countries you can name, we're ahead of. So we have not got a bad record on this. We do take it seriously, and we need to continue to do so.
Frank, I think you want to say something.
Kevin, just to respond to that comment regarding the UK being ahead on climate change. Yeah, we might be, but the problem is we're only in this global race, this global climate change race that we're trying to do everything against. We're only as fast as the slowest player.
So, we just have to do more. We have to set a better example. We have to, take further steps. It's no good us being, the best of a bad job, which is, what we are today.
Can I respond to that? I absolutely agree with you. I would have windmills all over our landscape. I don't have any issue with it. When there's a windmill application near my village, we had hundreds of objections. There is very little you can do in terms of infrastructure near where people live without there being lots of objections. But I absolutely agree with you. I think we should go further. I think we are world leading into offshore wind, but we should be world leading on onshore wind too. I think we should do everything we possibly can and put every investment we can in it. But the government does have regard to the cost of people's energy bills, because everything we invest, and we're investing £15 billion a year in climate change mitigation by 2020. And that's not the government investing, that's taxpayers who are investing that money. And the government does have regard to making sure that the burden on people, particularly on low incomes, is not overburdensome. And currently about £100 a year somebody's paying in terms of extra due to levies for climate change. So there is a balance here to be struck, but in essence, I absolutely agree with you.
There is quite an interesting comparison between the US and Germany in this, where the US has gone kind of very backing fracking very solidly at the same time as investing in renewables. And in America, for the last decade at least, they've had year-on-year reductions in carbon emissions. In Germany, where they've gone they've invested very heavily in wind, but have not used gas in order to get to their renewables, their carbon emissions are increasing because they're relying on dirty coal. Now that is something that we really need to learn a lesson from. And I think if we do care about climate change, then that's something that we really need to take into account.
Lady at the back, please.
Dr. Joanna Quinn, I'm a scientist and local resident. I don't believe the government is...
Bit louder.
Okay. So I'm Dr. Joanna Quinn, I'm a scientist and local resident. I don't believe the government is planning to make inland wind farms a permitted development. So if not, why not?
Well, I think as I just said, I think it was Joanna, as you said, I would support changes back in the planning regulations to make it easier to build wind farms. I absolutely agree with you.
Lady at the front. Come on, Steve, run. Get your steps in.
My name is Jessica Barfield, and I'm a Yorkshire resident. And my question is for Natascha Engel. You are the Commissioner for Shale Gas, is that right?
Yep.
And yet, even you couldn't this evening join the panel and make the case for fracking. You're just joining at the question and answer stage. So my question to you is, why are you only joining at this stage?
I joined when I was invited to, so I only found out about this meeting a couple of days ago, so I kind of changed my plans to be here. But yeah,
well,
I came on the panel as soon as I was invited.
Could you not make the case for fracking? Why am I just amazed that you've only joined for the Q&A? I'm sorry.
Just to be fair to Natascha, she was only appointed about a week ago, and I think
see what difference that makes. I presume she was appointed.
Can I say?
Yes.
I invited Natascha to be here, and I asked Steve to put her on the main stage, and Steve decided that wasn't going to happen.
Right, time for Steve to speak.
And the reason why is we had the format planned, but we only confirmed Monday, I think it was, and it was originally Natascha from the government listen, but before we request to put her on a Q&A panel so you can ask questions. But I'm really happy.
Surely you only wanted a one-sided argument.
Oh, hang on a minute, but Natascha, why don't you make the case?
Yeah. Why should we have to make the panel, Natascha?
Why don't you let her make the case?
Do you want to speak further?
I mean, I think it's very clear that you know, you are mainly of one view in this room. I mean, this isn't really a sort of a debate. This is a sort of opportunity for you to say what you think, and I'm really delighted that I've been able to come here and hear what you're saying and listen to what you're saying. You do have a very strong opinion. You've obviously researched it, and you know, nobody's going to change your minds. I think my role as commissioner I'm really surprised at this, actually. I'm quite used to quite sort of open public meetings in Derbyshire, but I mean, we don't get this level of being shouted at. I mean, normally people ask a question, they wait for the response, so, which I'm very happy to give you, but I'm also very happy to listen to what you're saying and not speak if that's what you'd like to do. All I'm saying is that there is a very large number of people in the UK who don't know very much about fracking and who would really like to know about it. You do know a lot about fracking, you've got it on your doorstep, so you know about it. I've joined the panel because I was invited to, and it's...
She's here now, and she's doing her best. So please, can we all be respectful of the time that we're all giving to this? As a personal observation, we in this area are incredibly well informed about this subject. We have really done our homework on it. So, I think that's overwhelmingly to our credit, but we must give everyone a chance to reply to these questions. Now, the gentleman in the red sweater has clearly got a view. Do you have a question?
Yeah, I do have a question.
Right, Steve.
I don't need the microphone, it doesn't work anyway. Yeah. My name is Alan Lynn, I'm from Third Energy. Now, we're here to talk about permitted development, and I guess my question is, does a garden shed need an environmental application and an environmental permit? Does it need an oil and gas authority approval? Does it need BASE to approve it? Does it need the HSE to approve it? Because even in the permitted development scenario, a drill well for exploration, which you are not allowed to frack, absolutely not allowed to frack, requires all of those approvals in addition to the planning permitted development approval, which looks at the surface and ensures that the noise, the transport, the air and the water are all being protected by the planning authority. Okay, so you don't need that for a garden shed, so can we stop kidding ourselves?
No, that's fine, but what's your question? What's your question?
Yeah, do the panel agree with that?
And who would you like to answer?
Any of them.
Right, Frank would like to go first.
First of all, Mr. Lynn, thanks very much for coming. It's important that everybody from all sides, we have to talk about it, you know, because it's a big issue. Climate change is a big issue. This is the issue regarding permitted development and the connection between NSIP. It's hardly unlikely that the Secretary of State is going to turn down the investment for permitted development, which is going to cost you 1 to 2 million, when he's already encouraged the industry to go and do that. So, you know, to say that, you know, it's pretty much a foregone conclusion. Once the company have drilled the well and made the investment, the Secretary of State is hardly going to turn it down afterwards, is he?
He's just done it to us.
Well, he's done it to you for a very good reason.
Can I say?
Excuse me. Paul Andrews is going to provide an additional answer.
Can I just say this, Alan? You know me, and you know that my primary concerns are including climate change, but my main concern is the environment, and it's the industrialisation of the countryside. Now, how would you like it if you went, if your neighbour simply said to a fracking company, you can come and drill in my back garden, provided, of course, you comply with all the Environment Agency's regulations and so on. You could comply with those environmental regulations. He could put his drill down right next to my back door, and there would be absolutely nothing I could do about it.
I do agree with Paul. I think the problem with the permitted development issue, and I accept your point, Alan, there's lots of other processes you've got to go through before you're able to drill a well. But the problem here is that with permitted development is a lack of certainty, a lack of clarity about what is permitted development for. So we know that one of the most industrial parts of this activity is the building of a well pad. That is a very significant piece of construction. And if this would mean a producer could build a well pad wherever they wanted, which is what Paul's saying, then we've absolutely got to oppose that. That's just not acceptable.
My name is Monica Gutierrez. I'm a Rydale resident. Is this on? I started being concerned about fracking for over 4 years ago, right at the very start of this whole campaign. With all the people I've met since I've been campaigning against fracking have been considered ordinary folk of Rydale. We are not a circus, we are ordinary people. I wanted to ask this question of Kevin because I feel that the government is not listening to us. We've been manhandled by the police on numerous occasions when we've just wanted to do peaceful protest. And my question is, are you proud to be an MP in a country that jails peaceful environmental protesters? And will you ask the Minister of Justice to support their appeal against disproportionate sentencing? I would like to point out that a driver in London was recently sentenced to 16 months for killing a cyclist.
Well, Monica, as you know, we've met many times to talk about shale gas exploration, and I've met with many of you individually to talk about it. I absolutely agree that the vast majority of people, there's lots of people who are concerned about shale gas, are decent, honourable people who have genuine concerns. So I don't think the travelling circus line, I didn't hear that line, but if that was said, then that's not my experience, although clearly some people do move around and protest about shale gas. But the vast majority of people I have spoken to on this issue are decent local people, and their views deserve to be heard, and that's what I've always tried to do. In terms of the policing of Kirby Misperton, I've convened meetings with the police, and Derek brought a delegation in with Hazel, and with Reverend Cray, and so we've tried to make sure that the policing is done in an appropriate way. I can't make an assessment of whether the case you refer to, whether that's an injustice or not, but clearly if somebody's peacefully protesting, that doesn't sound to me like that somebody should be arrested. But nevertheless, we've got to have a situation where people who are going about their business, a commercial business, can do so without unlawful obstruction. So I think the police have got a difficult job to do. They've got to strike a balance, but they should act even-handedly and fairly, and that's certainly the message we tried to get over to the police when we met with them.
Very good. Could you, I've been doing this, that's the sign of the cross. I thought you recognised the bishop.
Apologies for the symbolism. Bishop Graham Cray, resident of Kirby Misperton in my retirement, active still as the assistant bishop in the Diocese of York. I don't think my colleague Bishop James Jones is here this evening. He's also a local resident and has been responsible for 2 very significant independent panel reports, one on Hillsborough and one on Gosport Hospital. On both occasions, he says the fundamental problem is unaccountable power. Now, it seems to me quite clear that what we're talking about with this proposed change in the planning law is decisions for which there is no easy access for local accountability and which have the most drastic potential consequences on the communities about which they are made. Many of us here have read the research on health risks, we've read the Australian research on net job losses, and we've all made our concern about climate change extremely clear. The thought that such decisions could be made without serious, proper democratic local consultation seems to me quite appalling, and I believe it's part of a patronising approach that the government has taken to local communities on this. The Durham University research basically says local communities are talked down to on the basis that Father knows best, and if they keep saying the same thing, then we will believe it. There needs to be not just proper local democracy, but an actual serious debate on the issues that takes us seriously.
We've heard a lot about government listening, and it's very good that both of you are here to listen to us. But that seems to conflict rather with something that happened a couple of months ago. Government conducts a public survey on public opinions on a regular basis, and without any fanfare at all, questions about fracking were taken out of that survey 2 months ago. Can you explain that?
These are the public attitude trackers, and they had a big consultation, this is my understanding of it, they had a big consultation about whether the questions that were being asked were the right questions and whether people had any ideas. So there was a big consultation. They also took out questions on wind farms, I think, as well, at the same time. The question is still being asked annually, it's just not being asked every quarter or however many times it's being asked. But I think it's probably going to be put back in again. But I think both for wind and for
Will you be asking government to put them back in?
Well, I'll be asking government what happened, and I think there's absolutely no harm in putting these questions in. There's no harm in asking the questions, getting the responses.
There is a bit of harm in taking them out.
Clearly that's something that a lot of people have been asking about. So, and I think hopefully government will listen to that. In terms of the local accountability issue, I mean, I think it is quite difficult. You know, if you've got a difference of opinion on something, and I do absolutely agree with you about the importance of local debate. But you know, there's debate and there's debate, and I can hear how strong your view is and your opinion is. But that doesn't mean that, you know, there isn't also another opinion out there. And for having to have meaningful debate, you do also have to listen to what the other point of view is. And I think that's just as important as having that very important local debate.
Gentleman at the back, please.
District resident. Now, I believe in local democracy. There's also a chap called Dickens who visited Malton many times, and his favourite expression was bar humbug. And what I've heard tonight is a lot of bar humbug. I think there are probably two main reasons why there are so many anti-trackers. One is because of NIMBYism, which that's current. The other one is to do with perceived problems about climate change. Can I ask each person on the committee to explain how they solve this problem? At the moment, one of us in the room uses something over 3 tons of oil or oil equivalent per year for our travel, holidays, cars, food packaging, clothing, everyday goods, house heating, etc. How would each member on that committee reduce that 3 tonnes by personal example, and secondly, how will each member on that committee facilitate the production of local fuel to meet our residual fuel requirements?
Frank's got the best answer to this, but I've been driving hybrid cars now for 5 years, 8 years actually. I think that's a start. I know it doesn't answer everything, but I think we all need to do things like that in order to reduce our use of fossil fuels.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name, but the gentleman asked a very, very pertinent question, because in reality it's a question that we've all got to face up to. And as Nick Cowan mentioned earlier on, it's going to happen quicker than we originally thought. We thought we were going to be out to 2050 and these issues don't have to be addressed on a daily basis. Yeah, we thought we could leave it to our children to do. Well, unfortunately, we've got to do it. So we've got to take those decisions about, how to, do we buy another pair of jeans, for example? Yeah, do we need to eat more meat? Do we drive electric cars? Do we pay the price for it? Do we turn down our heating? So all of these issues, do we support local energy initiatives? What are we doing in our communities to reduce the amount of recycling, to increase the recycling that we do? What about particularly in our area here? Hovingham is a good example where I live. 50%, 70% of the housing stock is, anything between 50 and 100 years old. And we've got to find ways of improving the energy efficiency of those places. And by the way, I think there's about 5 houses in Hovingham that use gas, and that's with a gas tank. So we managed to live without gas. So there was a bit of a list.
One way is to use local shops and to carry your own bags and reuse those bags rather than buying plastic bags from the shops, which is something that we do. But I'd like to come back on this issue about NIMBYism. I am a local councillor. It is my job to protect the interests of my residents. And if I find a situation where I could have masses of these things industrialising the countryside and causing and threatening our businesses, our tourism, our house prices, yes, not mine particularly, but everybody's. Am I not entitled to take a view that I am anti-fracking because I'm fighting for my residents? That is my view, and it is a very important view. And I would also say this, that the government has relaxed so many regulations to make it so possible for the fracking industry to do what they like, that the effect is to transfer the value of our houses and our property to the fracking companies. That, in my view, is legalised theft.
Sorry, just before you do.
Well, you were asking all the panel.
Preston. That one doesn't have a It's on. Yeah, it's on.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I guess I'm just going to give, a trite answer in some ways. But in terms of the energy that we need to generate, we need a much wider mix, and that's particularly within the renewable sector as well. I spent a lot of time almost literally pushing water uphill in the Peak District, looking at the opportunities for micro-hydro, and we got some communities close to actually getting hydro installed, and then the grants went out of the system. For something like hydro, which requires about, let's say, 120 to say 200,000 investment upfront, studies, reports, ecology, and then quite expensive but very long-lived bits of kit. There are bits of hydro plant going which were made in the early 1900s by a fabulous company in Kendal, and they're still going now. It's really simple stuff. But when you don't give grants to people, even if those will be loans to be paid back afterwards, nothing happens. The second thing is I've been involved in the environmental movement for about 30 years now, which isn't a huge amount of time, but it was pre-climate change. I started cutting my teeth on acid rain. And there were already people who, in some respects, looked like sort of people in the wilderness, talking about energy efficiency. People like Amory Lovins from the United States, and people in this country as well. And if you go back and look at the stuff they were doing on energy efficiency, it's still as relevant now. And it's basically the $5 sitting on the pavement that we just need to pick up and use. So the answer to this, in some respects, is that government has to show a lot of leadership and make some clear decisions about where we need to go, and then technology will follow. And a simple decision is we don't frack, we can get gas from elsewhere for the time being, and we will move with technology if you give the signal for it. And lastly, the last thing I would say is you need to put real life vitality back into the planning system, and you need to put climate change and sustainability at the core of the planning system. And at the moment, planners have a very bad reputation, planning has a very bad reputation, not helped by recent government attacks on it. We really need to, you cannot move forward as a society without planning properly.
So, just from a personal perspective, if I can add to that, and this isn't pre-planned because I only met Andy tonight, we've got a lake at home, and it occurred to me that the water running through it would be a wonderful source of energy. So I investigated it, came up with a sum of money, a very, very significant sum of money that Andy's alluded to try and fund this. And then I thought, right, well, I better, as then chairman of the Conservative Association, I better just check what the planning position is on the turbine and its shed. So I made the mistake of asking Rydal District Council what the planning permission was. The mistake was they took 6 months to say, well, maybe you should, despite the fact that the turbine was going to be relatively small, the shed not much bigger, obviously, and wasn't going to be visible by anyone from anywhere. So by the time that happened, the government had taken the grant away, and without the grant, it was absolutely eye-watering sum of money. So I agree. There is more to be done, both in terms of planning and in terms of renewable energy. But now, they did back with the Scott.
My name is Dee. I'm a hairdresser. I have been doing hair these past few weeks when it's been quite overcast, washing people's hair with water heated with solar panels. Another of my clients had solar panels put on the roof. It was in planning permission, thinking she would get it, and she didn't. She had to fight to allow them to let it stay there. The reason being is because it was in a listed area. Now, we're planning to raise the underbelly of this country, the soft underbelly that filters the water, that does lots of things, and adding lots of things that I don't know about, but the scientists here do. Why are you making it so difficult for people, for the small person, to power their lives by making it cost so much money and not allowing them to do it when they're drilling and boring and flushing out with so many chemicals that are going to screw us all eventually in the end? Why do you make it so difficult?
I mean, the point you make about electric buildings is a very good one. That's actually a locally determined policy, not a national policy. In terms, okay, if I could just finish answering your question. No, I don't think that's right. In terms of feeding tariffs, which Andy and Kenan were talking about, the government has got to balance the books. That's a reality. There's some huge pressures. The government has no money. The government no. We'll answer your question. I don't think we do. I don't think we do.
You do. You make it so
I'm trying to answer your question.
And electricity companies don't like it either. Could that possibly mean that we are not putting so much money into their companies? I don't know.
I was trying to explain. What you're talking about is two things. A, the planning and listed building, and B was about the financial support for putting a solar panel on your roof. The financial support for solar panels was reduced significantly, which I opposed, because the government way overspent on its budget for feed-in tariffs. It was supposed to spend £7.6 billion by 2020, it spent £9.2 billion. So the government does have to balance the books because you pay for it, it's your money. All the government does is collect money from all the taxpayers and redistribute it. The government feels it needs to balance its books. I agree with that. There are some huge pressures coming down the line for the taxpayer, not least the health service, adult social care and pensions. Having said that, I absolutely agree we should be investing more in renewables. I think the answer to the question the gentleman posed earlier in terms of how we would deliver more localised energy is one of the solutions. I absolutely agree with you. Technology is definitely the solution. I have an electric car. I use green energy in terms of my home. We need to move to renew, certainly in wind power, more to wind power. We need to use nuclear. We need to use hydrogen. Leeds is hopefully the first in the UK that will go to a hydrogen-powered city, and hydrogen is carbon neutral. But hydrogen will be derived from methane. Methane is produced out of the ground at places like we've got, the potential sites we've got here locally. So that's the reality. The answer is, as Andy said, it's a mix of solutions to move towards a carbon zero energy production system in the UK. Can I just touch on Bishop Cray's point about unaccountable power? I absolutely agree with you. Some of you will know I spend a lot of time in Parliament fighting against the banks who are totally unaccountable and some of the abuses the way they tore businesses apart and are entirely unaccountable. Absolutely, you've got to be accountable. They should be accountable to government and local government. Government sets the policy in terms of national policy. You elect the government. If you decide to vote for it, it's entirely up to you, depending on the manifesto promises. In terms of local democracy, again, you elect your local councillors. That's how you make people accountable to power. But in essence, I absolutely agree. In this process, in shale gas exploration, the producers cannot be in charge. They must be held in check by the regulators and politicians.
Gentlemen at the back, please.
I'm Derek Beale. I'm a farmer from this area, around Malton area.
A bit louder, please. You've probably got to eat your microphone.
We're users of borehole water, and one of the biggest problems I can see with fracking that worries me is the chemical water that's being injected back into the ground. I've always known that water finds its own level. How can Kevin and Natascha guarantee me that that chemical waste water is not going to find its way into mine and plenty of other residents in this area who use borehole?
Yes, absolutely, Derek. We've got to make sure that's absolutely right. We've got to make sure that we have the right regulations in place and those regulations are properly checked. And we have the rules, for example, that rules don't exist in the USA, for example. We can only drill at a depth of 1 kilometre or below that. So around a kilometre away from the aquifer, which is where your borehole gets its water from. There are strict regulations in where you can drill and where you can't in terms of the source areas for extraction of water supplies for farms like yours. So it's absolutely right that we do proper baseline monitoring checks to say that where the baseline of the water is before drilling commences for 12 months, and then make sure that that water is not, there is no contamination. The water going down, which is 99% water rather than chemicals, added some non-toxic chemicals, but then once it comes back out, we need to make sure that there is no chance of that entering the groundwater levels.
You were mentioning also about re-injecting water. That's not something that we're allowed to do in the UK, and that's actually quite a big issue. We've also, I think, got to remember that we have got genuinely some of the tightest regulations in the world. We absolutely have. I have a trade union background, and one of the reasons why we have such tight regulations is because of the trade union movement, and they have made sure that our health and safety, our environment agency, the oil and gas authority, they are absolutely the best there is in the world. Now, you are not allowed to inject anything into the ground that is hazardous to human or animal or plant health. So it's absolutely not possible to inject any chemicals into the ground that are hazardous to human health.
Gentleman on the right, please. Can you hear me? Yeah. I made this point at the meeting in Pickering, and this has been completely ignored. The regulations that govern the use of pesticides in this country are in place and they work, and yet the fracking companies, having looked at their literature, show that they are going to use banned pesticides in their fracking liquor, injected in hundreds of tons underground. That those chemicals have been banned for years, and they will come back to the surface to infect boreholes and everywhere else. And you ignore this at your peril. So often I hear these discussions involving world energy, crises, everything else. What we are facing is a tyranny of Parliament, as bad as the tyranny of King Charles I's time. It is that serious, because nobody is listening to the people of Rydale. We have said again and again and again, we do not want fracking. No one is listening. Because the whole problem here is very simple. No human being in their right mind will foul their own living place. And yet, why should we permit anybody, especially large companies, come and do that despoiling and pillage for us? They are going to despoil our environment in which we live, our homes, our health.
Can I try and rephrase the question? The question is, we have loads of hoops that are regulations that fracking companies have to jump through, but they all apply the same. They all apply criteria which are called best available techniques at reasonable costs. Would you accept, Natascha, that those criteria of best available techniques at reasonable costs, which is not absolutely safe, it's relatively safe, that those criteria are set by the petrochemical industry?
I'll just answer one of the issues that you raised. It's not that nobody is allowed to inject any banned substances, chemicals, pesticides into the ground if they are hazardous to human or animal health. And the Environment Agency has to sign off every single additive, chemical, whatever you want to call it, that goes into frack water. Now, by all means, let's discuss about climate change and how we meet those climate change targets and around the safety, the regulations, but let's be realistic about it. Let's not start saying things that just aren't happening. Now, because what that does is it focuses on things that actually, if we're not allowed by law to put banned pesticides into the water, I don't think that that's something that we really need to be focusing on. And yeah, I mean, what was your question again, sorry?
My question is, do you accept that the criteria which are applied by all these regulation authorities are called best available techniques at reasonable cost, and that they are set by the petrochemical industry?
I mean, I think what is being used is the technologies that we have learned from America, from Australia, from those countries, Canada, where we know that fracking can be done safely.
Absolutely not. That's a load of rubbish. Absolutely not. Disgraceful. That's an absolute lie.
And those people who are regulating it are not the industry, they are the regulators. That's why they're called the regulators. They ensure
it's a self-regulated industry.
What companies do here is under very heavy regulation. Now, also, I just want to point out that there hasn't been any fracking for the last 7 years. So
because it caused earthquakes.
There's sort of being roughshod over local democracy, because actually local democracy has worked very, very well in stopping the fracking industry from doing anything at all.
That was an earthquake.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, I'm sort of hijacking. Can I ask you a question? If you believe the regulations are so fit for purpose, what do you think of Claire Perry's thing in the press this week saying she's prepared to change the regulations to suit for earthquakes and seismicity? Because that is a blatant attempt to change the regulations that you so call gold standard.
Yeah, drink the water while you can.
Well, as I said earlier, Steve, I think that was the wrong thing to say. And I think the clarification that came... You want Natascha to answer that one, mate? Okay.
As far as I'm aware, she has not said that she was changing the regulations. I think absolutely the traffic light system remains. There's been absolutely no indication that that will be changed. Absolutely not.
Right, you were saying, she said in a letter that that limit could be changed depending on, prepared to change what happened, depending on what happened in the future. The clarification that they came from the department was that we would follow the science, and I think that's a perfectly sensible position.
So, ladies and gentlemen, we are at about the time that we were due to finish. I think that we can go on, but that's at the goodwill of the panel. Are the panel prepared to take more questions? A few more questions. A few more questions, right? But I mean, obviously, what? Lady with the glasses over there.
Hello, my name is Janet Fisherwood. I'm a local resident and I have grave reservations about fracking. What I would like to ask our parliamentary representatives is, do you really want to go down in history as the equivalent to the people who cut down the last trees on Easter Island?
No.
Lady in the front.
I might have forgotten my question now. I'm Karen Garrett. I'm councillor for Great and Little Bath Parish Council, who are one of the councils next to Third Energy site, Hoban. I've been a parish councillor for the last few years and have seen, since the commencement of this, the erosion and the chipping away of the planning regime, which is concerning to all the councillors, I'm sure locally and nationally. So the onset of permitted development, or the proposition of permitted development, is obviously quite concerning to us. Now, with regards to what we've experienced over the last 4 years during this process, and it's kind of something for Kevin and for Natascha as well, as the new Shell Gas Commissioner. Third Energy's, I know Alan's sat behind me, Third Energy's finances have been somewhat precarious, shall we say, and the whole process 4 years down the line is no further forward. In future, when you're dealing with the communities or the councils or the applicants, would more rigour be given to a company's financial aspects before they get this far down the line and the communities that are affected by this?
I'm happy to say that, Karen. I mean, obviously you heard my reservations about community development. In terms of third energy, I absolutely think that it demonstrates that the Energy Secretary, Greg Clark, is a very cautious individual on shale gas exploration. It's absolutely right that he felt we absolutely needed to make sure that any company that does push ahead with shale gas exploration can fulfil its objectives and its obligations, and part of those are financial. So I won't talk about the specific situation with third energy, but I think it does demonstrate the government does take a responsible attitude. I think, and another way you can see that is the point that last time we fracked, as Natascha said, it was 2011 at Priest Hall, and there's induced seismicity. 7 years later, we have not fracked anything else because the government. And the point being, surely you recognise the government takes a responsible and cautious approach to shale gas exploration.
Right. The audience is beginning to vote with its feet, so I'm going to allow 2 more questions, and Steve has selected the first. Lady at the front.
Okay, I'm Heather Stroud, local resident. So I have a very simple question. The government have banned plastic straws, and this is a question for Natascha and Kevin. Are you even aware that INEOS, the biggest company that is going to frack, has licenses all across Rydale and North Yorkshire, is not going to produce gas for people's homes, they're going to produce plastic.
That's not the whole story, actually. When you produce gas, and Alan will know this a lot better than I do, when you produce gas, you get principally methane, also you get some ethane. I think the gas around here is likely to be probably 90% methane, 10% ethane. It's the ethane that makes the plastic. So I'm Michael Gove's PPS in DEFRA. I'm absolutely right behind a single-use plastic ban, which is, I think, where we're going to end up. That does not mean we'll stop using plastic. Plastic we're using so many different areas, but we need to use recyclable plastic, not single-use plastics.
I mean, this idea that all plastics are bad, I think that if we want to go to a renewables future, I mean, you know, without plastics, you're going to really struggle making wind turbines, solar panels, you know, aircraft are much lighter because of the use of plastics-based materials. I mean, you know, this is the sort of stuff that we should stop using. And actually, plastic is an incredibly valuable resource, and that we need to actually stop wasting it. We need to actually use it for those really high-end, you know, like medical stents, things like that. I mean, this and medicines all depend on gas and the extraction of gas. And actually, I think this sort of idea that we just ban all plastics overnight is also. This is exactly what people have been saying is about plastics. And also the other thing that I wanted to say was that the gas that INEOS are now importing is the gas that they want from here. So it is displacing gas that they are importing at the moment. So, you know, that gas has got a higher carbon footprint than what we'd be taking out of the ground. So there is an argument to be made that actually, you know, it would probably, in terms of climate change, do a much better job.
Right, I'm afraid we have got one final question from the lady in the pink president. Sorry, pink, blue.
I've got a question about how you're going to control this fracking, because that's something that you seem to both talk about as if it's a given. And in fact, Mr. Henry, in one of your talks, at Malton School, 2 or 3 years ago now, you had a gentleman, Martin Christmas, who was representing the Environment Agency, and he explained that the ratio of environmental officers to environmental permits, which is what would be controlling what was going on, they are largely self-policing, was 1 to 20. So how on earth are you going to control what is actually going on with the companies that are doing the fracking, when the environmental, because of the lack of resource and the lack of, and that also applies to Northwich County Council, who have a very, very, very small team of planning enforcement officers. But the Environmental Agency have a ratio of 1 in 20, so that means 1 officer for every 20 environmental permits. How on earth can you possibly think that that is gold-plated, which is a term that you've used quite a lot, Mr. Hollyreg, that is gold-plated enforcement, because it jolly well isn't.
And I agree with the resource problem in the Environment Agency. At this point in time, we have not, as you know, we're not fracking any sites in the UK at all at the moment. Good. But the reality is absolutely we need to beef up the numbers of the Environment Agency officers. We need to have a, well, I could just tell you what I've asked the Prime Minister and the Energy Secretary, a minimum number of inspections of all sites, a minimum number of no-notice inspections. The government has given the Environment Agency £5 million to beef up its resource for shale, assuming this rolls out. But I think it's a very valid point, and we need to make sure the resource is there.
So who's going to pay for that? The taxpayer. You could be putting that into something far more constructive.
Well, as you know, we are putting things into other things other than just shale gas exploration.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you all very much indeed for coming tonight. You have been a fantastic audience. And I think
yes, we have. Yeah.
Safely say that the panel is left in no doubt whatsoever about the strength of feeling on this issue in this part of the world. And if I may just by way of summary say that what we want is a joined up energy policy concentrating on renewables over fossil fuels, and we would like to see that implemented through the existing local planning system. So I'd particularly like to thank the panellists as well for being here. They've given up an awful lot of time to get here and to speak to you and answer the questions as best they can. I'm aware that there were, in fact, in the end, more questions than we had time for. At the beginning of the last hour, I thought we'd be able to get everybody to question and answer, so I'm disappointed that hasn't been the case. But starting at the far end, thank you very much indeed, Andy. Thank you very much indeed, Paul. A special thanks to Kevin and Natascha, that was really up and interested. Thank you, Kevin. Thank you, Natascha. Thank you, Frank. Thank you, Nick. Of course, this wouldn't have worked without you, so thank you all. So give yourselves a huge round of applause. And I'm sure that you'll be able to tackle, before they leave the room in a bit of a hurry, anyone you want to ask a final question to. But thank you.